In a normal world, this would be a negotiation. Allies meet, concerns are aired, language is softened. But this is not a normal world because Donald Trump has already decided the ending. Not compromise, not autonomy, not shared security, only one outcome: Greenland in the hands of the United States. Anything less, he says, is unacceptable. That single sentence changes everything. It turns diplomacy into theater, meetings into rituals, and allies into obstacles. You can hear it in the rhetoric: the easy way, the hard way. Those are not the words of negotiation. They are the words of ultimatum. And when an ultimatum is issued to a NATO ally, the question is no longer what does America want? The question becomes something far more dangerous. What happens when power stops pretending to persuade? If you want to understand why this moment matters far beyond Greenland, stay with me, because to see where this is going, we first have to understand what Trump believes he is entitled to. At first glance, this looks like a dispute over territory, an island, ice, distance, but that framing misses the point, because Greenland is not the core issue. Power is, specifically, who gets to decide the future of smaller nations when strategic interests collide. From Washington's perspective, the argument sounds familiar. The Arctic is opening, ice is melting, shipping lanes are emerging, security concerns are real. Even Danish officials acknowledge that reality. But acknowledging concerns is not the same as surrendering sovereignty. And this is where the problem hardens. Trump is not asking for cooperation. He is not proposing joint governance. He is not even leaving room for ambiguity. His position is absolute: ownership, control, nothing less. That rigidity transforms a policy debate into a zero-sum confrontation. For Denmark and Greenland, there is no face-saving exit, no middle ground, no diplomatic off-ramp, only submission. And when diplomacy offers no acceptable outcome, history tells us what often comes next. To understand why Trump sees this as not just reasonable but inevitable, we need to look backward. This obsession did not emerge from strategy papers or long-term planning. It began somewhere far more personal. Trump has said it himself. He loves maps. He looked at Greenland, its size, its position, and concluded something simple: that should be part of the United States. Only later did policy follow instinct. Advisors scrambled to retrofit logic onto desire: security, resources, geopolitics, and conveniently, history offered cover. The Arctic is changing. Climate change is thinning ice that once protected distance. What were barriers are becoming corridors. Sea lanes, military access, strategic exposure. In that new geography, Greenland sits at a crossroads between North America, Europe, and the Arctic. That makes it valuable, and in Trump's worldview, value invites possession. But Denmark's answer has not changed. No sale. Greenland's leaders have been just as clear. Autonomy matters more than affiliation. That refusal is the hinge point, because once consent is removed, interest alone becomes justification. And when justification replaces agreement, pressure inevitably follows. The stage was set long before this week's meeting. Pressure does not arrive all at once. It escalates. First, symbolism: a visit, highly publicized, carefully staged. J.D. Vance and his wife arrive in Greenland, not as tourists, as signals. The message is subtle but unmistakable. America is already here. Then comes leverage. Reports emerge, cash transfers, tens of thousands of dollars per resident, not framed as coercion, framed as opportunity. A referendum, a choice. But choices offered under imbalance are rarely free. This is what the administration calls the easy way. Diplomacy backed by pressure, consent nudged by incentives, and still Denmark does not yield. Greenland does not comply. That is when tone shifts. Trump goes public. We'll do something on Greenland whether they like it or not. Then the line that matters most: I would like to make a deal the easy way, but if we don't, we're going to do it the hard way. That is the moment the crisis crystallizes. Because when a superpower introduces force as an option, every prior conversation changes meaning. This was no longer diplomacy drifting, it was diplomacy collapsing. And behind the words lies a deeper mechanism few are willing to confront. What you are seeing is not improvisation, it is a pattern. Trump's fixation becomes policy, not through planning but through reverse engineering. The desire comes first, the rationale comes later. Staff search for arguments that sound strategic. Rare earth metals, naval access, Russian and Chinese presence in the Arctic. Each point on its own is defensible. Together they form something else entirely. A narrative that reframes acquisition as necessity. This is how systems normalize escalation. Once an interest is labeled security, opposition becomes irresponsible. Once ownership is framed as protection, sovereignty becomes an obstacle. That framing leaves no room for diplomacy, because diplomacy requires mutual legitimacy, and Trump's language denies that legitimacy outright. Denmark is not treated as a partner. Greenland is not treated as a people. They are treated as variables, and variables do not negotiate. They are adjusted. This is why meetings feel hollow, why cordial language cannot offset absolute demands. The outcome has already been declared. And when systems declare outcomes in advance, they tend to manufacture crises to justify them. That is exactly what Europe is beginning to understand. The second crisis does not explode, it hardens, it moves from implication to inevitability. Trump refuses to rule out force. That silence matters, because silence from power is not neutrality, it is permission. Then comes reassurance, not to allies, to reality itself. Stephen Miller goes on television, calm, certain. Nobody is going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland. That sentence lands in Europe like a warning shot. It assumes the outcome. It dismisses resistance. It erases consequence. The White House amplifies the message. A meme, a choice, a bright future with America or darkness aligned with Russia and China. Notice who is missing. Denmark, an ally reduced to irrelevance. Europe reacts not emotionally, institutionally. The European Parliament condemns the rhetoric, calls it a violation of international law, a challenge to the United Nations Charter, a threat to the sovereignty of a NATO ally. Behind closed doors, something more serious begins. Discussions, contingencies, mutual defense clauses. This is how alliances fracture, not with explosions, but with assumptions that force will not be resisted. And when that assumption proves wrong, history accelerates fast. To understand who ultimately bears the cost, we have to shift perspective. If you live far from the Arctic, this can feel abstract. Maps, ice, strategy. But power never stays abstract for long. Because when great powers stop respecting limits, ordinary people absorb the shock. And that includes you. You feel it when alliances weaken, when rules become optional, when force replaces consent. You feel it in higher risks, higher costs, less predictability. For the people of Greenland, the stakes are immediate. Their future debated without their consent. Their identity treated as negotiable. For Denmark, it is existential. An ally told that sovereignty is conditional. And for you watching from afar, this is how global stability quietly erodes. Because if borders can be redrawn by pressure, no guarantee truly holds. Not trade, not security, not peace. This is the moment where indifference becomes dangerous. If you care about a world where power still answers to rules, now is the time to pay attention, to ask questions, to stay engaged. Because what happens here will not stay here. And as this pressure radiates outward, its impact will not stop at Europe's edge. What happens in the Arctic never stays in the Arctic. because Greenland is not just territory, it is precedent. If the United States can openly pressure a NATO ally, reinterpret sovereignty, and hint at force without consequence, every global actor takes notes. Russia watches carefully because borders justified by security sound familiar. China watches patiently because influence gained without firing a shot is the ultimate leverage. Alliances begin to recalculate, not emotionally, strategically. Trust becomes conditional, commitments become hedged. This is how power blocks loosen. Europe starts asking questions it hoped never to revisit. Can American guarantees be relied on? Are treaties durable or temporary? And when doubt enters an alliance, deterrence weakens. Markets notice instability. Supply chains react to uncertainty. Defense postures shift. A single demand over Greenland begins to ripple outward, not because of the island itself, but because of what it signals. That rules apply until they inconvenience power. That persuasion is optional. That force is back on the table. This is how global order frays, quietly, incrementally. And once that unraveling begins, the future stops being linear. It fractures into possibilities. To understand where this could lead, we need to look forward and confront the scenarios now forming. There are three futures taking shape now, not predictions, pathways. The first is restraint. Trump presses but stops short. Rhetoric remains maximal. Action remains limited. Greenland stays Danish. The alliance survives, damaged but intact. This is the best case, and it depends on something fragile, self-restraint from a man who rejects limits. The second future is normalization. Pressure becomes routine. Threats become background noise. Denmark absorbs the shock. Europe adapts. Rules bend, but do not break yet. Sovereignty becomes negotiable by power. Precedent is set quietly. This is the most likely path, because it feels manageable until it isn't. The third future is rupture. Trump acts not diplomatically. Force is used or unmistakably prepared. NATO fractures. Europe invokes mutual defense clauses, and the unthinkable becomes unavoidable. An American act that mirrors the logic it condemns elsewhere. At that point, the system does not collapse suddenly. It realigns. Power replaces principle. Strength replaces legitimacy. History does not repeat, but it does rhyme. And which future emerges will depend on one thing: how long power waits before deciding patience is weakness. This is not really about Greenland. It is about a question every era must answer. Does power still need permission, or is permission now optional? Trump has made his position unmistakable. Ownership, control, nothing less. That clarity is precisely what makes diplomacy impossible, because when outcomes are fixed in advance, dialogue becomes delay, and delay eventually runs out. History teaches us something uncomfortable. Systems do not break when rules are questioned. They break when rules are ignored without consequence. What happens next will not be decided in a single meeting or a single post. It will be decided by what the world tolerates. If ultimatums replace negotiation, if sovereignty becomes conditional, if force becomes an acceptable shortcut, then this moment will be remembered not as a dispute over an island, but as a turning point. If you want to understand how power is reshaping the world in real time, stay with this conversation. Share it, question it, keep watching, because the next crisis will not announce itself. And when it arrives, the rules we failed to defend here will already be gone.